Open your kitchen cabinet right now. Look at what's in there. Canned goods, pasta, maybe some cereal. Enough for a few days, maybe a week if you stretch it. Now open your refrigerator. Everything in there depends on a truck that left a warehouse 3 days ago, a warehouse that depends on a ship that left a port 2 weeks ago, a ship that depends on a factory that depends on components that left another factory 6 weeks ago, in a country you've never visited, managed by a logistics system you've never thought about, running on assumptions that haven't been seriously tested since 2020. And you haven't thought about any of that. Nobody does. That's exactly the problem. Because here is what the managers of that system will never say publicly, what no politician will say in an election year, and what no financial analyst will say while the market is still calm. The American supply chain is not a system built for resilience. It was built for speed and cost reduction. Those are different things, profoundly different things, and the difference only becomes visible when something goes wrong. In 2021, something went wrong, and what should have been a permanent wake-up call was treated as a temporary inconvenience. The ships backed up in the ports. The shelves went empty. Baby formula disappeared. Semiconductor shortages shut down auto plants. A country that produces more agricultural output than almost any nation on earth had people rationing toilet paper. It lasted about 18 months. Then it got better. People exhaled. The media moved on. The political window closed. And every structural vulnerability that produced the crisis, the single-source dependencies, the zero inventory philosophy, the concentration of manufacturing in one region of one country, stayed exactly in place. Not reformed, not diversified. In some cases, made more concentrated in the name of recovering efficiency. We are more exposed today than we were in 2019, not less. Here's the number that the people who run this system know and hope you never sit with long enough to understand. The average American grocery store carries approximately 3 days of inventory. 3 days, not a week, not 2 weeks. 3 days of food, measured against what customers would actually purchase if they knew the supply was uncertain. In a normal week, with normal demand and normal deliveries, 3 days is fine. In a week where something disrupts the delivery network, a port strike, a weather event, a geopolitical shock, a cyber attack on a logistics platform, 3 days becomes the entire margin between normal and empty. A 58-year-old retired logistics manager in Columbus, Ohio, named Carol Brennan, spent 22 years managing distribution networks for a regional grocery chain. She retired in 2019. In 2021, she watched the crisis unfold from her living room. She told a supply chain trade publication that the thing that frightened her most wasn't the shortages themselves. It was that nothing about the 2021 crisis was surprising to anyone who understood how the system was actually built. The surprise, she said, was that the public had no idea the system was that thin. The people running it had always known. They had simply never had reason to explain it, and no one had ever asked. 3 days is not a buffer. 3 days is a held breath. The second layer of the problem is the one that nobody in the political conversation is addressing clearly. And it is the layer that makes the 3-day inventory problem almost impossible to solve quickly. The United States has spent 40 years systematically eliminating the domestic manufacturing capacity that would allow it to produce its way out of a supply chain disruption. In 1980, the United States manufactured approximately 25% of global goods output. Today, that number is approximately 16%, and a significant portion of that 16% is dependent on imported components and raw materials that come from the same concentrated sources that create the vulnerability in the first place. You cannot fix a supply chain crisis by building more things. If building more things requires parts that arrive on the same ships, you can't get into the same ports. A 64-year-old machinist in Dayton, Ohio, named Robert Schaefer, ran a small precision parts shop for 31 years. He made components for medical devices, aerospace, and industrial equipment. In 2016, he lost his 3 largest contracts in 18 months, not because his quality declined, because his customers found suppliers in China and Taiwan who could produce the same parts at 40% of his cost. Robert closed his shop in 2018. He told a local newspaper he wasn't bitter. He understood the economics. What he said he didn't understand, looking back in 2021, was why nobody in Washington seemed to understand what was being lost when shops like his closed not just jobs, but capability. The physical knowledge of how to make a precision part doesn't survive in a spreadsheet. It lives in the hands of the machinist. When the machinist retires with no successor and the shop closes, the capability disappears. You can't rebuild it in 6 months when a crisis arrives. Robert's shop is gone. So are 70,000 others like it that closed between 2001 and 2020. The capability doesn't come back because a politician announces a reshoring initiative. Tell me in the comments, have you noticed specific products that disappeared from your regular stores in the last 3 years and never came back? Not temporarily out of stock. Gone. Reformulated, discontinued, replaced by something cheaper that isn't the same thing. I want to know what you've seen in your area. because that's the supply chain story that never gets written. The third mechanism, the one that turns a manageable disruption into a cascading collapse, is what logistics engineers call the bullwhip effect. And it is the reason that every supply chain crisis in modern history has been worse and longer than anyone predicted at the start. The bullwhip effect works like this. A small disruption at the consumer end, slightly elevated demand, slightly reduced supply, causes retailers to overorder to protect themselves. Their overordering causes distributors to overorder to protect themselves. Their overordering causes manufacturers to overorder raw materials to protect themselves. By the time the signal has traveled from the grocery shelf back to the raw material supplier, a 10% disruption at the consumer level has become a 40 to 50% disruption in the supply chain. Not because demand changed that much, but because every participant in the chain responded rationally to their own uncertainty, and the response is compounded. In 2021, a 52-year-old food company purchasing manager in Minneapolis named James Holbrook watched this happen in real time. His company makes shelf-stable condiments. In March 2021, his retail customers started ordering 30% more than normal because they were worried about availability. He ordered 30% more packaging materials and ingredients than normal because he was worried about availability. His packaging supplier ordered 30% more of their raw materials for the same reason. By June 2021, his actual consumer demand was up about 8%. His supply chain was in full crisis mode because everyone had overordered simultaneously, creating artificial shortages of components that would have been adequate if everyone had ordered normally. James told an industry conference that the most maddening part was that the product was never actually scarce. The panic about scarcity created the scarcity. The system doesn't fail because of bad luck. It fails because of rational self-interest operating inside a structure with no coordination mechanism. Now here's the historical evidence that should make this feel less like analysis and more like pattern recognition. Because this is not the first time America has learned this lesson. And it is not the first time America has chosen to forget it. In 1942, 6 months after Pearl Harbor, the United States discovered that its rubber supply had been almost entirely cut off. Japan had taken control of 90% of the world's natural rubber supply in Southeast Asia. America had no meaningful synthetic rubber production. Within months, tire rationing began. Gasoline rationing followed, not because of a gasoline shortage, but because tires were so scarce that limiting driving was the only way to preserve them. The entire American war machine was threatened not by a lack of steel or oil or soldiers, but by a dependency on a single material from a single region that nobody had treated as a strategic vulnerability until it was gone. The government mobilized an emergency synthetic rubber program. It worked. 2 years later, America was producing synthetic rubber at industrial scale, but it took 2 years in a wartime mobilization to close a vulnerability that planners had identified as a theoretical risk for decades before the crisis arrived. The parallel is not metaphorical. The United States currently imports approximately 90% of its active pharmaceutical ingredients from China and India. The single-source dependency problem that almost lost World War II for rubber is structurally identical to the pharmaceutical supply chain today. The crisis has been identified. The reports have been written. The hearings have been held. The dependency is getting worse, not better, because the economics of domestic production remain unfavorable, and no emergency mobilization has been ordered. In 2011, a massive earthquake and tsunami hit Japan and triggered a nuclear disaster at Fukushima. Within 6 weeks, auto plants in the United States were slowing production, not because they were affected by the disaster, but because a single supplier of a specific type of specialty paint pigment was located near Fukushima and produced 50% of the global supply. 50% of the global supply of one paint pigment in one facility, in one coastal city. And the American auto industry didn't know it until the pigment wasn't there. One pigment, one facility, one earthquake, global production disruption. In 2021, a single container ship named the Ever Given ran aground in the Suez Canal for 6 days. 6 days. The ship was refloated. The canal reopened. The backlog of cargo took months to clear. Insurance estimates put the cost of 6 days of obstruction at approximately $9.6 billion per day in delayed trade. The canal carries roughly 12% of global trade. One ship, 6 days, months of cascading disruption. Each of these events was called unprecedented at the time. None of them were. They were the predictable consequences of building a global supply system with maximum efficiency and minimum redundancy, then being surprised when a single failure propagated across the entire network. History does not repeat, but the structure that produces these failures has not changed. It has become more concentrated, more optimized, and more brittle with every year of normal operation. The efficiency was real, the cost was deferred, the bill arrives during the crisis. Here's what this means for you practically. And I am not going to end this video with fear and nothing else, because that would be the easiest thing to do and the least useful. The 3-day grocery store inventory problem is not something you can solve, but you can create margin for yourself that the system doesn't create for you. A 90-day supply of the non-perishables your household actually uses is not a bunker mentality. It is a buffer against a disruption that history says will happen again. Not if, when, and not because of a conspiracy, but because of a structure that has never been designed to be resilient and has consistently chosen not to become one. Start there. Not with fear-based purchasing, with a systematic inventory of what your household consumes and a quiet, undramatic build over time to 90 days of that. The pharmaceutical dependency is not something you can personally solve, but you can be honest with yourself and your doctor about which medications your household depends on and what a 6-week supply disruption would mean. That conversation, which most Americans have never had, is the beginning of actually managing that risk rather than assuming the system will manage it for you. The reshoring question is political. Support for domestic production capability is not a partisan issue. It is an infrastructure question with national security implications. Politicians who tell you that free trade and domestic capability are mutually exclusive are simplifying a problem that requires both. And the hardest thing, the thing that no government program can create for you, is local knowledge. Who in your immediate community has skills, tools, or production capability that would matter if the supply chain went down for 6 weeks? Not as a survivalist fantasy, as a realistic assessment of what resilience actually looks like at a scale that's manageable. The answer to a fragile national supply chain is not an individual bunker. It is a community with redundancy built into it. Here's what the historical record tells us with unusual clarity. The societies that have navigated supply chain disruptions with the least damage, wartime Britain, post-war Germany, Japan after Fukushima, were not the ones with the best government programs in the acute phase of the crisis. They were the ones with the deepest reserves of local capability and community coordination that existed before the crisis arrived. The programs helped. The pre-existing resilience was what made the programs have something to work with. America built the most efficient supply chain in history and called it strength. The 2021 crisis revealed that efficiency and strength are not the same thing. The rubber crisis of 1942 revealed that. The Fukushima pigment shortage revealed that. The Ever Given revealed that. The pattern has been legible for 80 years. We chose efficiency every time. We will keep choosing efficiency until a disruption arrives that is large enough and long enough that the 3-day buffer runs out and the choice becomes visible to everyone simultaneously. The question is not whether that disruption will come. The question is whether you will have 90 days of margin when it does, or whether you will be reading the same memo as 4 million other people at the same empty shelf. If this video changed how you think about the food in your kitchen and the system that put it there, hit the like button. Not for the algorithm, for the next person who sees an empty shelf and wants to understand why it's empty before it happens to them. Subscribe, because next week I'm covering the specific federal policy change in 1994 that eliminated America's strategic grain reserve, a buffer that existed for 50 years after the Great Depression, specifically to prevent supply chain shocks from becoming food crises, and the quiet political decision that ended it. If you buy food, that decision affects you. Subscribe before that video publishes. And tell me in the comments, what is the one product your household depends on that you have genuinely worried about being unable to get? Not theoretically. The thing that, when the shelf was empty in 2021, made you feel something you hadn't felt before in a grocery store. That answer is the next video. And I read every one.